Do you ever have a feeling that you know what others simply do not know, yet in that knowing, it almost works against you? Because other people just simply do not want to know? Well, that's sort of the path of an empath. And as we talk about the emotional body, that may be an ongoing theme, not just for this segment, also for your life. Ready to get into it? Let's go. Grand Rising and Great Tiding, Adepts and Initiates. If you haven't yet, go ahead and click on that subscribe button to stay in constant contact with all the great content on this channel. So today we are talking about the emotional body. Now this is a very important part because it ties into the very fundamental aspects of the subconscious mind, also ties into something called our dark matter body, and is something that ultimately determines and dictates the filter and the way that we experience the world around through the lens that we hold within. Now this is a great place to really talk about, because as we really jump into the whole concept of the emotional body, it's more than what we talk about in terms of emotional intelligence. The subconscious mind is an entire construct that exists. It's something that is so deep and has levels and layers to it. You know, our conscious mind is what we like to revel in, what we know that we know. Yet it very much is like the iceberg that Freud once used to identify things. The tip of it is really rather minuscule as we look at the totality and the entirety of it. And as we deep dive in these waters, one of the interesting things about it is that with these levels, there's a certain level, or rather layer, of knowing. There's the stuff that we know that we don't know, and that's sort of like shallow subconscious mind. There's stuff that goes even beyond that, the stuff that we know that we don't know, and that starts to go even further, or rather don't know that we know. And then even at the very depth of it, down deep at the bottom, is the stuff that we don't know that we don't know. And the thing about this is that each and every aspect of it can impact and influence our everyday lives, and is something that really comes into play not just from our own life's experiences, can actually come in from also an epigenetic, or coming in from our forebears. You know, my father, very stoic. You know, very difficult for him to express emotion. Same thing with his grandfather, and I would wager same thing with his father as well. And so as we look at all these parts and pieces, there's this almost imprint that exists. Now, I say that because I was raised and my dad really wasn't around. And so for me to be able to express my feelings and emotions has and continues to be something that I'm very intentional about. If I don't take time to really look within and to connect within and take that time and make that space for myself, then all of these things can just bubble up and can come bursting out at the seams. And so it seems that in this case it's something really good for me to do, and even though my father wasn't present within my life growing up as a child, I do have and had this tendency of not being able to fully articulate, to identify and truly experience what it is that is my emotion and my feelings. And for me in my lineup, energetic, kinesthetic, psychic, empath, this is an area that I have been incredibly focused upon, especially in the last 10 years. Now, as we look at that, how it transcribes then, is that with our emotional body here, that ties to the path of the healer. Now, as I talk about this, I don't necessarily mean to say that the focus and the only thing that this type of person who has this in their primary and perhaps in their secondary is the healing of others, right? Because it's more than just that. It starts within. Now, these types of people tend to have experienced some hardship, especially early on in life, growing up. Now, what ends up happening is that there is a whole history of traumatic experiences that this type of person may have experienced. And a large part of that is ultimately tied to perspective that they can exercise as the healer. Now, going into the intuitive piece next. is our empathic ability. Now, this is something that I want to clarify on, because often when we talk about an empath or empaths, we're really talking, often the conversation is about emotion. And absolutely, with this intuitive talent, empaths who are largely tied to their emotional body are capable of reading emotion. Walking into the room and feeling things, being able to feel at a distance sadness, happiness, joy, feeling uplifted at one moment and then just feeling, sort of down and heavy in the next. Now, the thing about this is that we got to also look at the levels and the layers of emotion, because we have the emotion that we're feeling, for example, right? It could be joy. Right? We could be very joyous about something. Above that, we could have a feeling about that. Maybe I feel guilty about being so joyous because perhaps someone in my life is having hardship and experiencing things that are difficult for them. Now, beneath that, right? Emotion at the core, right? And that's something that empaths are able to pick up on, as well as a feeling of that emotion, right? Also something that's held within that field of information. Beneath that is a core. If we're talking about trauma, for example, a core wound, if we're just talking about things in general, a core experience. Now, this core experience is something also that empaths are able to tap into. It's almost though like more than just that experience within this life, within this incarnation. It's also something that often is the case, actually precedes this lifespan. What I mean to say is, as we talk about concepts around past life experiences, one of the things that empaths are really great at doing, many not even knowing that they're doing it, is being able to dissolve the entanglement that exists within our own incarnational identity. I know that's like a whole big thing. What I mean to say is that each and every one of us, right, the physical body, is here, and lots of things can get stored and kind of stuck in the physical body. That's where somatic therapies come into play. That's where things along sound healing can come into play, specific resonant frequencies, so on and so forth. Now, the physical atomic body, right, all of this is something that holds information. And a lot of the information that comes into and from come from two primary sources. One, the epigenetic overlay, right? And so that is again, my dad being stoic, grandpa being stoic, great-grandpa being stoic, not being able to necessarily fully experience nor express their feelings, their sensations and emotions, right? And so that tendency, that coding, if you will, can be passed down. Now, the thing about this whole concept of epigenetics is that the information of our ancestors can be stored in our own body, meaning that stoicism, that inability to necessarily and fully connect to, let alone express my emotions, is something that I have and continue to work with, right? And so that's one line that comes into play. Empaths are able to tap into that. The emotional experience may be something that actually predates my own existence. Now, the other side of that, right, we have the epigenetic overlay, that information that comes from our lineage, from our ancestry. We also have our incarnational identity. Now, that's what's effectively downloaded. If you think about if someone is sharing a file via Google Docs, for example, right, and so you have access to a specific file. Now, as you download that file, that information, that encryption is now on your desktop, on your laptop, on your computer. And that also is effectively how our higher dimensional identity, our higher self, can have an imprint upon our physical incarnation. Now, this here, again, is a mix of both of that information that comes in from our ancestral line and our incarnational identity. Now, as these things happen, the great thing about this is that as an empaths can tap into that emotion, can sense the feeling of those emotions, right? And then also the source experience that exists beneath it. And can work to actually dissolve the level of entanglement that happens. That entanglement is with ourselves, within ourselves, and is something that can also tie to our ancestral line. Now, when it's tight like this, it's a knot, right? And that's not a good thing. And so what empaths, one of the things they're able to do is to loosen that knot, to allow that disentanglement so that we can have a truly authentic experience, right? Because we have these triggers in life. We experience something in our lifetime, and that can create a reactivity that we have. And that reaction that we have is not necessarily us. It's tied into the source core experience and or trauma that happened, and has nothing to do with what's happening now, which means that we're not really truly present in this now. In fact, it's quite the opposite when we get to be really reactive. And sometimes it's not necessarily all a matter of negative emotions. Sometimes the things that make us happy, right? And so irrespective of if we identify it as positive or negative, one of the things that empaths are able to do is to experience in the entirety and the totality of this moment, this now. And a large part of that is this disentanglement of past source experiences to truly emote in this moment, which is an incredibly powerful thing. And that works in both ways in terms of receptive and being able to read a room, sense a person, as well as projective, to actually share, different frequencies and emotions, to influence even crowds and be able to actually impact an entire room, and even more than that. However, that's another conversation for our more advanced class with empaths. Now, going into the element, unsurprisingly, the element of water. Now, one of the things about that is it can take many different forms, right? Water is such a diverse element. It can be solid as ice. It can be air as its vapor or steam form. It can be water as it goes. And so in all of these different aspects, it's a very diverse element to be working with. And that fluidity, especially as we talk about emotion, is very, very important as it actually formulates and integrates in the physical atomic body. Going one step further down, the realm that it ties to is more of that feminine aspect with that magnetism. It is magnetic, right? Some people just have a natural charisma. They just have a sense about them. Their field of emotional experience, of emotionality is high, and it almost has like a gravity to it. We're just drawn towards them. And a part of that comes from this magnetic nature, which is tied to the emotional body, which by the very definition of it is a more feminine attribute. Now, as we come down to the biology, this is where we get to be really interesting with the different systems, one being the endocrine system, and the other being our fascia system. Now, endocrine system is all about all of the different, not just organs, the different aspects that really stimulate a biochemical result in the different glands. And so we have everything from the adrenals, which handle things like stress. We have the pituitary, which governs all the others. And a straight line, which interestingly enough, highly corresponds to the location of the 7 primary chakra system within our body. Now, I say the 7 primary because there are actually 15 larger nodes. However, there's more than that as well. Again, another conversation for another day. The endocrine system, though, is one part of the biology, and it ties into our fascia. Now, fascia is a really interesting thing. Some would say it's even fasciating, right? And so fascia is really interesting because what it is, I think it was 2014, 2015, something like that, was actually identified as an organ. So fascia, the connective tissue that exists within our body, connecting everything from muscle to muscle, muscle to bones, so on and so forth. The subdivided, strands and striations of muscles. I mean, all those things ties back to fascia. Now, fascia is a really interesting thing because it connects everything. And one of the things about this realm, especially with the empath and the emotional body, as we look at things, everything from the collective consciousness and the emotions that are held there, raw and unbridled, but also as it really interacts within our own physiology. right? Fascia is very interesting because it doesn't just connect everything, allowing things to be interconnected. Like if I stretch my neck, that can actually have an effect and improvement upon the length down my back, and maybe even improve the capacity for me to be upright and to walk straight. Same thing if I release some of the fascia in my foot. That can actually have a reverse effect and actually loosen some of the tension that I hold in my neck. So this interconnectivity is a part of it, yet it also directly ties to water because it's avascular, which means that fascia doesn't necessarily stimulate a circulation or circulatory response on its own. So it actually needs to be massaged. We need massage in one way or another to actually cleanse our body because fascia is also tied to two major other systems, our lymphatic system, which helps in terms of flushing all the gunk out of our body, which is why it's so important for massage or myofascial release, and then also our limbic system, our memories. And so as we talk about memory, as we just mentioned in terms of that empathic ability to tap into not just the emotions, not just the feelings, also that source experience, it's incredible because then we can actually, via the very fascial tissue of our body, access information within inside of ourselves because it's actually held within the cells of the body. Now, what does this look like? Well, empaths just kind of know stuff, right, about people. They just know stuff about people. And it's not limited to, it's actually tied very much to the astral realm. So everything that is on, that has been, that is, and can be on this reality stream is something that empaths have the capacity to access. It's just where that ability as a healer comes into play to access that core source experience. Now, as we look at all these pieces, finally, we get down to the bottom in terms of the qualities that we see here. Now, the qualities are very interesting because we go into, at least with this system, intangible and receptive. Now, as we talk about these qualities, what we're really just talking about is what are some of the attributes that these different intuitive types have, and how does that look like? Intangible means that it's not something that is as easily discernible, and because of that, there's a whole lot of gray to it. We talk about, for example, the kinesthetic. Kinesthetic is probably the most accurate of the different intuitive talents because it has a more binary system. Something is yes, something is no. Something is true, something is false. Now, where that part gets to be a little muddied is just making sure that we are in a place of more coherence rather than stress, because that's where some of the information yielded is not as accurate as it could be. With empaths, though, it's all gray, right? It's the broad spectrum of experience, and by the very nature is more receptive. And so how that looks is, again, just kind of knowing things, like just spontaneously having a feeling, often not their own, right? Or deep knowing about someone and something about this someone. And in doing so, having the capacity to access a whole wealth of information about the entirety and the totality of this person's not just life, their lineage, and also the lifespan of their incarnational cycles coming into form, physical form, past lives, even going into the future, because it's all along the stream via the astral realm of information that exists and is highly accessible to the empath. Okay, that seems like a lot. I think I'm going to pause there and actually really pow here. That's it for now. Love and aloha, take care, and ahui ho.